Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by some of my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos and friends to review films either current or classic. And this week we are taking things very classic. That's right, the 40th anniversary of Poltergeist is just about upon us in a couple weeks. We are celebrating 40 years of Poltergeist on the show tonight. We're going to be reviewing the film with spoilers, FYI. We're going to be talking about maybe some of the impacts this film had on the horror movie industry. Anything and everything Poltergeist is fair game in our discussion tonight. But welcome and hello to my co-hosts, who I literally can't do this without. Let me introduce them in turn. Jim Pugliafago is with us on the show. Hey, babe.
Hi, I am here and I'm ready to go. It's finally gotten around to a classic movie, so I think it's one a lot of people will know at least. Probably even more than any new blockbuster. So, yeah, this one's going to be fun to talk about.
For sure. Lots of great conversation, I think, is coming up for us with this movie. And of course, it wouldn't be the same conversation without William Melendez. Hey, Will, welcome.
Hey, I'm really excited to chat about this one. It's fun to do these retrospectives on films, especially when we hit milestones, right? You know, this is the 40th anniversary of Poltergeist. Earlier this year, we did the 40th anniversary of Conan, which was a lot of fun. So it's really fun to sort of like dig back into 1982, and it's a good year for film. And so I'm really excited for this one. Let's dig this one up and see where the bodies are buried.
I wondered when the bodies jokes were going to start. We're off to the races. I love it. Well, for anyone who is familiar with our show, our typical format is that we talk about a movie spoiler free for the first 10 or 15 minutes, then give fair warning, then go into spoilers for the meat and potatoes of our review. But because Poltergeist is, let's face it, 40 years old, and that makes me feel a little aged, I'm just going to say, we're going to go balls to the walls spoilers right from the get-go with this one. So if you haven't seen Poltergeist yet, I know it's possible because we watched it with a friend last night who had never seen it. So not everyone has seen it. If you have not yet seen Poltergeist, you may want to step away, come on back once you've watched it, and then, join us for this conversation on digital tape delay. If you have seen the film, or if you just don't care about spoilers, please stay with us. Hang out. All right. And Ryan in the chat. Hey, Ryan. He says, you only move the headstones.
How could you?
That, of course, being a line from Poltergeist. Great way to kick us off, Ryan. Thanks so much for that. Jim, Will, are you ready to get into our Poltergeist discussion?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's go towards the light.
Carolyn.
I'm in the spirit. Let's go.
Total aside, whatever you call it, Spirit Halloween stores are apparently opening up now. It seems a little early, but
does it? Yeah, it's never.
I don't know. August. I don't know.
Never too early for some.
Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Here we go. Our discussion of Poltergeist. All right, Jim. This movie is 40 years old. A lot of people have seen it already. But if you could just give us a brief setup of what this film is and what are your thoughts? I mean, you've been around for this movie's entire run. What do you think?
Yeah, I have been around for this movie's entire run. I remember this movie coming out. 1982, when this movie came out, was one of the best years for movies, certainly up to that point. Some amazing stuff has come out in 1982. We had E.T. that year. I'm just going to go through some of them. I have a list here, sorry. But E.T., John Carpenter's The Thing came out in 1982. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, like one of my favorite all-time comedy movies. Grease 2 came out And that brings up, you know,
Oh,
this week's sad passing of Olivia Newton-John. Also, so that kind of circles back on that. And yeah, Poltergeist. So I guess what we're going to explore today is, is this film deserving of being called a classic, right? I think there's so much to talk about with this movie. This movie's directed by Toby Hooper, who directed Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I believe. I think he was the director on that film. The screenplay was by Steven Spielberg, and also Steven Spielberg produced this film. And we're going to talk about that relationship a little bit too, because man, if you watch this movie, it's hard to not think about this movie 40 years later as not a quote unquote Spielberg directed film. And we're going to get into that. There was a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of
speculation.
speculation and controversy, I think, surrounding that. And we'll get into why that is and what we really think happened. This one stars Jo Beth Williams, Craig T. Nelson as the parents of this family whose house is somehow haunted by a host of demonic ghosts. And the family, it's the two parents and the three children have to endure and survive the onslaught of ghosts in this movie. This is a great movie, in my opinion. I mean, especially looking back on it, it's like, how is this movie going to hold up after 40 years? And I was shocked at how surprisingly well this movie held up, not just as like as a ghost story, but special effects have evolved in 40 years a lot, right? But this movie, the special effects in this movie do hold up. And I think we want to talk a little bit about that too. And I think I know the reason why they seem to hold up a lot better, especially after I've been watching the documentary. I think I plugged it on last week's show, Light and Magic, about Industrial Light and Magic, who are heavily involved in the special effects of this movie. But yeah, I love this film. Brad, I'm not sure if you mentioned it. I'm sorry if I missed it, but we are going to spoil from the outset here. We're not going to stop and do a special spoiler section. We're going to go right into spoilers. We're going to make the bold assumption that most people have seen this film by now. And if you haven't, shame on you. Go see it. But spoilers, the family's house is haunted by ghosts. That's what we're going to say.
All right. Jim, thanks so much for the setup for that and hearing your initial thoughts. Will and I were just teeny little babes
Right.
when this movie came
1
out.
years old, still in diapers, I'm sure.
But Will, I'm curious about your experience. Of course, Jim saw this as an adult. You
A young
saw
adult.
this-
Come on.
A young adult. Okay. But Will, you maybe saw this during a different age period for you. What was that like? And what do you feel about this film?
Yeah, first of all, I can guarantee you I did not see this one in theaters. I was born 2 months after this movie came out. So this movie is older than I am. Only by a bit, but it is older than I am.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I of course caught it way later. I couldn't tell you when. This is not one of those movies that I have. Like, there are those movies that you catch up with and it's sort of like, I remember where I was. I was in this sense memory with these people and stuff like that. I don't remember when I first saw it, but I remember the first time that I saw it, and every time that I've seen it since, I've enjoyed it quite a bit. This is one of those rare movies that blends horror and also sort of like wonder and almost like this like 80s sense of like family adventure all together. Still very much lean. This is a horror movie, but it's tinged with these other things that make it something very different and also something very timeless. Look, I rewatched this one, and when you go and revisit an older movie, even if it's one that you've seen recently, there's things that you can start to pick away at the threads of. And I was getting ready to do all of that with this one. Like, okay, well, it doesn't really hold up. And I'm surprised that it actually held up better than I was expecting it to on a rewatch. Even some of the stuff, like my memory was you kind of sometimes conflate like the pop culture moments with the actual movie itself. Sometimes with these movies, right? So I kind of forgot the order of a couple of things when I rewatched this, and so I kind of remembered that like this house is clean, and when that happened, I'm like, oh wait, yeah, there's still more movie left. My
Yeah.
brain's just sort of always remembered it as like being at the end of the movie because you see it in pop culture towards the end of like this house is clean is sort of like a punchline to a joke or something, right? That was cool. I liked that we got to see every time that we saw something spooky in this movie it was a little bit of a build and we saw a little bit more and it was a little bit spookier than the time prior. I also like that there were some remarkably funny cuts where just like something like there's a moment very early on in this movie where you can tell that that there's just like this wonderful comic beat where the kids are scared, they're in bed like because the lightning storm's happening, and the dad gives them this like, hey, if you count the time between the lightning and the thunder, you can tell that it's going further and further away, and the kid sort of smiles as he counts to 5, and you realize it. The dad smiles, and then it hard cuts over to both of the kids like crammed between the parents in bed, and you realize like, oh, there's a whole thing that happened afterwards, and it's funny, and it gives you this sense of like what family really is, and it's cool that you get that when you have all the the rug swept out from beneath you, and you have this family dealing with with this lost child. I will say the one thing that didn't hold up just narratively is I forgot how much of a throwaway character the older teen daughter was in this. Like you could probably cut her entirely out of the film and it would change absolutely nothing, but that's I'm not nitpicking like this movie. It was just like a funny thing that I discovered upon re-engaging with it. This one's a lot of fun. This is if you love horror, I think you'll enjoy this one. If you're not a huge fan of horror but you want to sort of dip your toes in every so often just to sort of mix things up, I think this is a really good one. This is a great horror movie, whether you are deep into the obscure horror film, or if it's not your cup of tea, but once in a blue moon you want to feel how you feel when something goes bump in the night. This one's a classic for a reason, and I'm really glad we revisited this one.
Awesome, Will. Thank you so much for your thoughts. For me, I saw this movie probably when I was 4 or 5.
Wow.
My dad had this thing about like, yeah, it's
Scaring
totally okay
scaring the
to
shit out of his kids.
watch scary movies, with your toddler. But I just remember being so scared by this film when I was a kid. To this day, I think my fear of clowns partially comes from the clown doll in this movie and how it tries to strangle the little kid. Comes to life, and then the other part of my clown fear is it, the 90s miniseries. But so there's that. Just the whole conceit of like these uncontrollable forces in your house. You don't know they're there. They're moving shit around. They're causing doors to slam. It's spooky as fuck. And it was funny, babe. I'm gonna tell this story from last night.
Oh
If
my
you don't
god,
mind.
yes, please.
We're watching the movie and shit's going bump in the night, and all of a sudden our smart lights above our dining room table where we're having dinner while we're watching the movie go out, come back on, go out, come back on, and then flare to their full brightness just out of the blue.
Yep, totally happened.
And it totally, like, Jim like jumped and like
I'm
had
like, we all looked at each other like, this is, you got to be shitting me. It's happening during the movie.
Oh God, I love it.
And then to top it off, we are watching this movie and it's thunderstorming in the movie, and it starts thunderstorming at our house. So an hour after we're finished with the movie, I'm trying to go to sleep, and it's thundering so loud that it's like shaking me in my bed. And all I'm thinking about is, okay, count. The further the count gets, the farther the storm is away. So that's something I think about every time it storms. That scene from that film, and I think I carry a lot of Poltergeist with me. in my everyday life, and pop culture references. They're here, they're back from the second movie. I probably say that, very often. This movie is very iconic. Obviously, some incredible visuals, great practical special effects. Jim, I'd absolutely love to talk more about some of those with you guys. But also, it was interesting for me as a gay man who likes hairy men. I had forgotten that Craig T. Nelson is like bare chested through like 3/4 of this movie. So it was great to see him running around,
little sexy fun time in the beginning of the movie. Yeah.
Little sexy dad bod action. I'd also forgotten that they were totally like smoking out on pot in their room. And then the kids run in.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a crazy movie. There's so much to talk about. I'm going to yield whatever time I have left, just so we can get into it. But this movie is absolutely fantastic. Holds up really well 40 years later. And if you're looking for something to put on to scare you a little bit, I think this is a good one.
You can't go wrong with this one. Yeah,
Brad, you mentioned something that I that I did discover sort of on a rewatch. You watch a movie and you pick up on just little things, and one of them was so early in the movie when the bird dies, and they put it in the cigar box. And the girl says like, "This, I don't like the way Tweety doesn't like the way it smells."
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any of them smoking a cigar at any point in this movie?
No. In fact, we see them with that box with their rolling papers and weed in it.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, when I saw that when I was younger, I never really put two and two together on that. Like, the reason it smells, and watching that, I was like, oh, that's clever. Like, they never drew like a big neon sign to that joke. It was just a little thing that appeared in the script. And I appreciate that. Again, it's moments like that in movies that make me appreciate them all the more, because it sort of speaks to sort of the craft that goes into the writing and the storytelling.
Yeah.
You can just sort of have those appear and let them just enrich the other story that you're telling.
The weed is never mentioned, right, discreetly or specifically, right? But there's that scene, and which is really, really subtle. And then there's a little bit less subtle scene where the parents are totally, I think the mom is actually smoking in the bed, and they're obviously high because they're all giggly and goofing around, and that's during the early part when it's hairy chested time. But yeah, I mean, this movie, I was shocked watching it. I'm like, so this movie came out as PG. Now, this was before PG-13 was a thing. PG-13 came like 2 years later, largely because of some movies like this one that really pushed the envelope. I don't know what kind of deals were made with Spielberg and the board of rating movies, but there's several curse words in this movie. I think shit and asshole, and a couple of times. And as well as, there's some pretty gory stuff going on. I mean, a guy tears his face off, in the mirror, as well as, the not so subtle in some places, drug use at the time. At the time, weed was certainly not legalized in any form, medicinally or recreationally. So, so yeah, this movie is kind of an interesting thing that they got it pushed out as PG, which probably helped the movie box office wise tremendously, right? Because kids, teenagers were going to see this film, and really digging on it. So, and it was a great introduction, I think, not to pot use, but to good horror films, for that generation. It was kind of at the time, it was a very timely, and hip is not the right word I'd use, but like it was a modern horror film, at the time. And I think a lot of younger audiences really dug that. It wasn't the Vincent Price, Bela Lugosi kind of horror stuff. It was really modern with modern effects, and it really made a splash.
Well, and if you think about it too, this movie hit at a really interesting time too, because Spielberg's name is on it. Amblin Entertainment is on it. And we had, I think, a week after this movie came out, E.T. came out. And there's definitely an effect that I think happens here where going back to the 80s, you had some of these movies that were of kind of this tier that weren't necessarily the big blockbusters, but are still ones that are in multiple movie screens that have a lot longer running time, because it's not just sort of like you see it in the first 2 weeks and then it's like immediately pushing towards streaming, right? So I think you ended up also getting, as ET blew up really quick, then you got to start to see a little bit of that splashback over here as well. So that's that's an interesting thing.
Yep.
Literally back to back, Poltergeist, and a week later, ET. Wow,
it's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah. And there's a story to that we'll get into, but I see that some of these listener comments are piling up, so and some of them are really interesting. I think we should get to them.
Yeah, I agree. I was waiting for an opening. I didn't want to interrupt you guys.
Right.
So Thomas in the chat says he saw this movie 15 years when he was 15 years old in theaters. Thomas, I'm curious, did you also see E.T. a week later? Did you make the double, whatever you want to call it, achievement of seeing both of those movies?
Yeah,
the double fee teacher.
Ben is with us. Ben says, "Howdy, handsome bears." Well, from one handsome bear to another, thank you so much. We appreciate that. And Ryan tells a fun story. And actually, I didn't know this until last night. I was up till like 11 o'clock because it was thunderstorming, and the thunder was just too loud to fall asleep to. So I was reading a bunch of trivia about this movie. But I'll let Ryan tell this. So Ryan says Spielberg's hands were the actual hands that peeled the face in the face peeling scene. And the reason for that is they only had one. I don't know if that documentary you watched, Jim, talked about it, but they only had one, and the actor was afraid he was going to fuck up the shot. And so Spielberg was like, "Hold my beer. Here, I'll do it." And there you go.
Yeah. I mean, in that documentary, Light and Magic, they go over this stuff because budget was a real concern back then, especially for like the first Star Wars. That was not the hugest budget. They got a lot bigger budgets later on in those movies, but a film like this didn't have a lot either, and that's why you have some of these really ingenious special effects. And the fact that you don't have a lot of money kind of forces the effects creators to think outside the box, right, and do some things that really advance the art of special effects. And a lot of that stuff happened for this movie and the movies around that time. But yes, Spielberg, there was only one model face to be torn off. They didn't have the money to build another one, so they had to fucking get it right the first time. Same thing with there's a scene, kind of a climactic scene toward the end of the movie where the house, the family's house, implodes on screen, from the demons, or gets sucked into hell or whatever. They cover that on the documentary, how they did that. And it was one model, one house. They did it with like a vacuum pipe that sucked this model in, and they shot it from above. And then they actually shot at it with shotguns to make it splinter. And it's they only had one time to wreck that model on camera. And they got it right. Because can you imagine if like someone, I forgot to turn the camera on, or something like that during this would be catastrophic. But yeah, just seeing the ingenuity of these guys for these special effects. One of the effects that I really loved, and Brad, you and I both commented on it when we saw it on the screen, is just an in-camera effect of like, it's called a pull focus or something like that. And there's one where Jo Beth Williams, the mom, like the door to the haunted kids room is kind of at the end of the hallway, and there's light rimming, like coming out of the cracks in the door and all kinds of goo. And it, like, the camera, she's running toward it, but as she is, like, it looks like the hallway's getting longer. It's an amazing shot. I don't know if, I'm sure it was probably done in a movie before, but it really was like pretty spectacular then, and it still looks amazing now.
Let's talk about another special effect. Did you like how lifelike the skeletons looked in the pool scene?
You mean the real skeletons that JoBeth did not know were real until after the scene was filmed?
Those would be the ones.
You mean that scene that she didn't even want to shoot because she was afraid to get in the pool with all the
Yeah.
lights and cameras around? Yeah, that one.
Oh my god!
Lots of great stuff.
I didn't know this, but apparently lots of movies use real skeletons that the movie studios like have somehow acquired, and they've like glued together, and they use them for movies.
Yeah. Well, listen, when it's my time to go, I'll probably be cremated. But if I wasn't, I would be honored to have my skeleton used in a movie. You know what I mean? That would be kind of awesome.
We should check the credits to see if the skeletons are credited. That could
That
be how
would
you
be-
get an maybe
That's how you get the IMDb.
maybe that's how you get your IMDb credit.
Well,
Yeah.
apparently they come from like a like biological, like cadavers that
Cadaver
are
school,
cremated.
yeah.
Yeah.
And even it has been such a weird, controversial part of this film's history because originally you had people saying like, yeah, by the way, this happened, and then later it was like, nah, that didn't actually happen. And I mean, even up until like a few years ago, when there were some like depositions and stuff, like it was still being sort of like sorted through. I love that this movie has its own lore. Now, unfortunately, this movie has its own lore for some pretty unfortunate reasons too. Like this
Yeah,
movie is
curse.
considered to be cursed. It's one of those cursed films, and part of that is because of the fates of several of the especially young actors who appeared in this movie, and that's unfortunate. I won't go over what those are because it's grim, but at the same time, just knowing that while watching the movie, I will say it did add another layer on the rewatch, right?
Mhm.
Like knowing that, and like seeing these young actors and thinking like, ah, shit, like
they're no longer with us. They
they're
should
no
be,
longer,
and
exactly.
they're no longer with us, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a shame that somebody who's, that an actor who was starred in such a iconic movie, as you said, Brad, right, is no longer. They'll forever be part of that, right? But unfortunately they're not around today to see that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did either of you guys, when you were watching this movie, remember a line from Craig T. Nelson that like is not in the current version of the film? Did either of you catch that?
Say that again.
So, well, I'll just tell the story.
Yeah.
So I remember there being this line from Craig T. Nelson where he says, "I hate Pizza Hut."
Oh, yes. That might have been in the original movie.
So it was in the original movie, and it was in the original copy that we had on VHS. But apparently, I was doing some research on this last night when we watched the movie, and he never said the line. They got a lot of pressure from Pizza Hut to take the line out of the movie. So for future releases of the film, they just removed it. The problem is it happens between a scene where they're in the kitchen, like testing out the moving across the whatever. And it happens between that scene and going to the neighbors to like ask them if anything weird is going on. And so you just end up getting this weird cut away after they're like, "We'll go to Pizza Hut, honey, it's fine." Then it cuts and they're just suddenly at the neighbor's house halfway through a sentence. And you're like, what just happened?
It's now considered to be one of the worst edits in movie history, actually.
Is it really?
It's in speaking of lore about a movie, this movie is also famous for having one of the worst edits in movie history. And it's because, there was a dialogue scene where, because she was playing with the chairs all day, right? And show how the chairs move around. She didn't have time to make dinner. So she says, let's, I think the little girl says, can we go to Pizza Hut? And the mom says, yeah, let's go to Pizza Hut. And then Craig T. Nelson says, oh, I hate Pizza Hut.
I hate Pizza Hut.
And that whole conversation was cut out. So it cuts in the middle of one scene to the beginning of another scene where they're at the neighbor's house. And if you watch, it's funny because when we were watching it, we have a friend staying with us. And he, during that edit, when that moment came along, and he had never seen the movie before. So we have a young friend who's never seen the movie before, which was kind of cool to introduce somebody to that movie. And he's like, that was a fucking weird edit.
Yeah.
I think his exact words were, "What the fuck just happened?"
Yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Well, and it's weird because like you could cut it a bunch of other places and it would be just as weird. Imagine if you like if the cut was okay. So imagine you have the cut right after. Let's go to Pizza Hut. Yeah, let's do Pizza Hut, and then you cut right there. Then it feels like a shill, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it kind of
Yeah.
does.
So yeah.
I wish maybe they probably should have done some ADR or something
Yeah.
to make it a little smoother. But
Yeah.
Just like we hear this dub of Craig T. Nelson, instead of saying I hate Pizza Hut, say I love Pizza Hut, but we just had Pizza Hut yesterday.
Yeah.
I love Pizza Hut. But yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the director kerfuffle with this movie.
Yeah, let's get
this,
into that.
yeah,
Let's
if
get
you
into
watch
that.
this movie, I've done 40 years ago and a couple times since, and last night, I'm like, this is and feels like a Steven Spielberg movie, right? This the name on the director's name on the film and in IMDb credits is Toby Hooper, and he was there for a lot of the filming. But the word is that Steven Spielberg was there for all but 3 days of principal shooting and did a lot of the directing on set. With regards to shots and setting up shots and so forth. And there's a lot of there was a lot of controversy to the point where I think Spielberg had to come out and actually make a statement thanking Toby Hooper for the job that he did directing this movie and allowing him so much creative input, allowing Spielberg so much creative input to the process. Because the part of the problem was that Steven Spielberg would have directed this movie. Problem is he was under contract to film E.T. E.T. came out the same year, so he was working on E.T. and Universal would not let him. That was back when studios kind of owned the rights to directors and actors, right? You signed a contract with them. And which was much more controlling, I think, than it probably is today. But he was not supposed to direct another film while he was doing E.T. So that's why Toby Hooper was brought in to quote unquote direct the film. Even though if you look at it, I mean, so much of this movie just looks like Spielberg.
Well, it's really interesting. Some of the actors have said that they thought Spielberg was directing the movie because in their scenes he was directing, including Zelda, who has since passed away. She only shot for 6 days, but I guess Spielberg was doing a lot of the directorial stuff when she was on set. So it was just, there's a lot of confusion there. Jim, you mentioned some Spielberg-esque shots. He loves his like zoom in, panning close-ups to the face. And this movie has at least 8 of those shots. So it's
all over the place.
Either Toby Hooper is like massively jerking off to Spielberg, or like Spielberg, I don't know, maybe inspired him to do these shots and gave him permission. I don't know, but something's going on there.
Well, I'd also think of it this way too, and this is my personal thought on this is that I think one of the things that sometimes gets lost in this whole discussion is Toby Hooper is an amazing director, and I think that for me it takes a little bit of something off of the shine of the movie to try to sort of take away some like the credit that like Toby Hooper should get for making this movie, right? Toby Hooper is an amazing director. Toby Hooper is also a director who he and Steven Spielberg shared a friendship to the point where when Spielberg wanted to make a horror movie, and he had this idea for like this scary alien thing, which eventually sort of turned into 2 separate projects, both E.T. And Poltergeist, and he couldn't make both. He asked Toby Hooper to help make it, and Toby Hooper stepped in to do it. You don't do that type of thing if you're going to be, if you're coming in to direct for someone and you're going to immediately steal focus away from what their original intent was. And you don't trust someone with the acumen of Toby Hooper to come onto your project unless you grant him the freedom to do that. You look at the next three Amblin, and the other thing too is this was an Amblin film, right? So when you're making movies under a particular production house, production studio, a lot of times you are also like not only adding your own things as a director, but you're also doing the things that match sort of like the tone of the film that you were hired to make. The next three films that Amblin made were Gremlins, Goonies, and Back to the Future, all of which feel like Spielberg movies, but none of them were. It's Joe Dante, it's Richard Donner, it's Robert Zemeckis, right? And it's all because they shared a kind of like a similar DNA of that production company. So I think that's important for me to sort of like
it is. Well, and I don't want to like undermine Toby Hooper's ability as a director because he is a talented director, but I still can say this movie feels like a lot like a Spielberg movie. Like if you had put Spielberg's name on there as director, I would have been, yep, that definitely is a Spielberg movie. There's nothing about this movie that doesn't really feel like a Spielberg movie. So I don't know. Both can be true, I guess. I don't want to take credit away from him, from Toby for this movie, but it's just a very interesting kind of story. And this story has probably happened many times in movie history, right? Where different creatives have come together and, the sensibility is different because, one creative maybe has a bigger vision than the other one or something like
that. A great example is honestly, is AI. AI is a really, really interesting story because it was a story that is a Spielberg movie that's done in Spielberg style. But the weird connect in between the two is it was originally being made by Stanley Kubrick, another close friend of Spielberg's. And the idea behind it was Kubrick wanted to make a Spielberg movie. He wanted to make that style of movie. So when he passed and Spielberg sort of took up the mantle to do it, it wasn't Spielberg making a Spielberg movie. It was Spielberg making what he envisioned a Kubrick version of a Spielberg movie to be. I don't know that I necessarily love AI as a movie, but I love sort of like that hidden sort of like love letter kind of within the making of it.
Yeah.
But you see that all the time, right? And I think that this movie gets it sort of like, in a weird way, like it's part of its lore. But I mean, we sometimes think about films from the perspective of like auteur theory, like, like it's only the director that makes a film, right? Oh, that's a Guillermo del Toro movie. Oh, that's a Quentin Tarantino movie, because you do have these like tour de force directors who do have their stamp on things. But there are a ton of movies out there that are, all movies are made by a collection of people who are all adding their different styles and adding their different tastes and things. And what's cool is like that final stew that comes out the other end of it, and sometimes it's, more of a studio film, and sometimes it does kind of play more into a very specific, like, director style. But that's something that's always struck me as just a little weird on this one. And I get it. This movie has so much other lore to it. You can't help but talk about it. It's that cool a movie, right? Like you can't help but sort of explore all
when you have cast members that are coming out saying that they thought Spielberg directed the film because they never saw Toby Hooper in their entire time on set, shooting and being directed, I can understand how,
there's a controversy.
There's a controversy there. So it's interesting to me that 40 years later, this controversy is still raging and still being talked about. There's actually a 4K remaster of this movie coming out in just a few weeks.
Oh.
And apparently there's going to be some new extra materials.
Pizza Hut lines.
I don't know if the Pizza Hut cut is going to be back in the movie. But supposedly there's going to be some more documentary type material that's going to go with this film. And I think even though we just watched the movie, it might be interesting.
Oh yeah.
To go back and watch some of those things. They've got like archive footage talking to some of the actors, directors, Spielberg. I think it could be very cool to see.
I would buy that sight unseen. Although I gotta say, the streaming version we rented. Did we rent or buy it? I
We
forget.
bought it for $10.
Bought it.
Which
The
is
one we watched
fair,
looked
yeah.
great. I mean, for a 40-year-old film, I thought it looked fantastic. The colors popped. Everything was pretty sharp.
You know, it's
and
really cool.
What's that?
I have to give props to Apple because we get our movies through iTunes. Apple does this thing where if you buy a movie and then they later come out with a much like better quality version of that movie, they will automatically give you the best quality.
Oh, that's nice.
So when that remaster comes out in a few weeks, Jim, we can come back to it and we'll have that new version already.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Oh,
I
that's
can't
really
wait
cool.
to see that. I can't wait to see what comes with the movie. But yeah, I could totally see. That's it. That's my next tweet. Bring back the Pizza Hut cut.
Well, this one, I think that's the nice thing about this film's popularity, right? Is that you're able to get these good archival prints that you're able to do these new like restorations / like additions of, as different formats become available very cleanly. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of great companies that are out there doing kind of that same work with like hard to get, out of, but a lot of times they're having to stitch things together, and you can get some beautiful things, but sometimes what you get is the best of what you get. But here, I think just because of just the
we may have lost Will.
can you hear me now?
Oh,
yeah,
you're back.
Yeah.
You're back. All right. Rewind to the beginning of that interesting thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just saying, like, it looks really sharp, right? It's really interesting just how good this looks and how well this was, the version that I rented as well looked. Like every scene looked really good. Like I didn't get that like grainy in a bad way fuzziness that you sometimes get with older films, especially on modern TV. Sometimes they just don't play it as well as certain older ones do. So yeah, no, this was a very pleasurable viewing experience all across the board.
Speaking of pleasurable viewing experience, Jim, you mentioned earlier that friend of the show Kevin is staying with us, and this was his first experience with the movie. It was really interesting to me to see his reactions to certain things. One of them, Jim, you caught last night. So we're having dinner, and Jim pauses the movie to explain why the TV keeps playing the Star-Spangled Banner.
Yes.
Because Kevin didn't know what that was about.
Yeah, at the beginning of the film, I mean, the opening credits play over the Star-Spangled Banner plays over the opening credits of the movie. That's the opening of the movie. And then there's a couple of scenes of the TV being on and the Star-Spangled Banner. But I said, Kevin, do you understand what's going on with the Star-Spangled Banner in this movie? Do you think it's not like an overly patriotic thing? And I actually explained to him, he didn't know that on broadcast TV back then, channels would only broadcast up until like midnight or 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. or what it was. And then they would go off the air and they would have a sign off. And they would typically, a lot of them would play the Star-Spangled Banner before the screen went to static, which is the staticky screen is, of course, the iconic, TV screen image in this film.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's crazy. Like the older I get, like how there are people out there who things that I took for granted, the common knowledge things, I guess, right?
Yeah.
That come from my past that just have disappeared or just gone.
Well, and to Kevin's credit, this isn't just a Kevin thing. This movie is getting a lot of discussion right now because of the 40th anniversary and the Blu-ray coming out. I saw at least 6 people on Reddit last night ask why in the movie they kept playing the Star-Spangled Banner with images of Lincoln and what that was all about.
The Iwo Jima memorial.
So I think what that means is a lot of people who are maybe on the younger end of things are hearing about this movie. They want to see it. It's iconic. They haven't seen it before. But yeah, there's just some things about it being a movie of its time that they don't get. Another thing that Kevin had a big reaction to last night was the ending of the film.
Yes.
So it ends with the family just going into the hotel and the the subdivision being left like half on fire, and he's just like, "That's it? That's the end of the
Wait,
movie?"
that's
It's
the end of the
like,
movie? Like, what happened?
where's the resolution of like the ghosts and what happens? And it's like, nope, that's just
That was the
that,
resolution.
that was it.
They thought they could live with this thing, but they realized just how deep the issues went, I would say, beneath the ground. And then they realized that they could not. And the best option was to get the fuck out of there.
Get the fuck out and get the TV out.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so this is a family that, and okay, thematically also, I mean, if you really want to get into like kind of the themes of the things too, this is a family that's like looking for the perfect, like American suburban life, to the point where the guy sold 42% of the houses in the subdivision and he's about to get the new one up on the hill. And in the end, the thing that is most important to them is just them and their safety, even if it's just in a small holiday inn far away from this life that they had built, So this isn't necessarily a film about the American dream, but that's in there too, right?
Yeah.
So
it's funny, in a movie today, they may have put a scene in there where like the ghosts, they're still like they go to the hotel or something, or something really weird. Like they put the TV out on the porch, right on the balcony of the hotel, and the family goes and he slams the door, and that's the end of this movie. But it seems like today, in today's movie sensibility, you almost expect like there to be like the TV to like come on,
like
come on,
some static, yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then when you don't get that, you're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Where's my stinger? It's like, it doesn't need a stinger.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting because you're right. Like, people of a certain age don't have that experience of like, which they experience in this film, where that thing where you fall asleep watching a movie, and then you wake up just like very randomly, and like you're groggy and you're disoriented. Like, what time is it? Did I fall asleep? And all that you have on the screen is just the because you slept through the close off, right?
Yep.
Eventually that got replaced by infomercials, and eventually that got replaced by content 24/7, and eventually that got replaced with Netflix saying, "Are you still there?" But still, there was this moment where media just stopped, and when you woke up, you're just like, "Well, I guess it's time to go to bed. This is done." So,
yeah. A friend even commented that like the staticky noise was like, that's annoying as fuck. I'm like, you wouldn't believe how many people would sleep through the night to that noise, to that white noise. Yeah.
Yeah. My mom did every night. She would sleep with the TV on, and that white noise was just, it helped her sleep. And if you came into the room and turned the TV off after the white noise started, she would wake up because she didn't hear it. But that reminds me of a funny story. One time, I came into her room in the middle of the night for something. I don't remember how old I was. Probably 7 or 8. I had seen Poltergeist, and I go into her room, and the TV in the bedroom was one of those old like cathode ray tube versions, and it's static, and the tube is flickering. And all I could think of was like Carol Ann in the TV. And it scared the shit out of me. I've never jumped into mom's bed so quickly as I did, I think, that night. And she's like, "What the hell is going on? What are you doing? Like, what's wrong?" So.
The white noise to sleep thing. They actually have these like white noise generators, whether they be like websites or apps on your phone that you can use to replicate that exact same experience. And one that I'll use sometimes, not for sleep, but for when I'm working. Like, I'm not one of those people who can like work while they're listening to music. I don't understand people who can do that. That's like not me. I need like silence, and I need like stuff to be blocked out. So I'll sometimes load up what's called a brown noise generator, which is like white noise, but it has some extra bass in there too. And it blocks out like a lot of noise, and it's just sort of this calming
Mhm.
thrum, which is perfect when I need to focus on something. So and I don't know how much of that comes from those sense memories of like falling asleep with the TV on and
Mhm.
the white, or if it's something more primal, like it reminds us of like womb noises or whatever. I don't know. But
Yeah.
it's a good thing and it exists, and I strongly recommend it to people.
We haven't talked about the score for this movie.
Yeah.
I think the score for this movie is fantastic. Listening to it, first of all, the sound design is great. There's some stuff going on like under the surface of the sound, especially toward the beginning of the movie, that is so like creepy and just adds to the atmosphere of this movie. But the score is great. It wasn't a John Williams score. It was
Jerry
Jerry
Goldsmith.
Goldsmith, who probably would have won the Oscar for score that year. By the way, Poltergeist was nominated in 3 categories and didn't win anything. Of course, E.T. was nominated for
Mhm.
everything and won everything, I think, in that year.
Yeah.
But he got beat out by John Williams. But this was a very good score in this film.
I only know it's Jerry Goldsmith because Jerry Goldsmith scored a lot of Star Trek movies and episodes.
Yeah, right.
So
That's right.
yeah, I recognize that name and some of the musical motifs that he uses. There's almost this like lilting sort of lullaby, like la 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 thing that
Mm.
kind of, it actually reminds me of the music from Home Alone. When we were watching the movie
Wow.
last night, I was like, oh my god, like it's taking me back to
Huh.
Christmas time in New York, you know.
I don't know
But
if we looked up the composer for that for Home Alone.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's the same composer,
You'd
but
probably be like, "Oh
yeah.
shit, it is the same person." But one more thing before we sign off. I'm sorry. The star of this film is Zelda, right?
Oh, she's amazing.
I mean, she comes on the screen and does her thing, and it's incredible what like how she elevates this film. Like you've got
Mm,
good performances from Craig T. Nelson, Joe Beth Williams, the kids, Heather O'Rourke. But when she steps in like halfway through, and it's quite a while into the movie before
mhm,
she steps in and she totally steals just about every scene she's in. I think it's pretty amazing for a relative unknown to come in and do something like that. And good on her because her performance here is just amazing.
mhm. It's interesting. I hadn't seen this movie in probably, I don't know, 15 years before we rewatched it last night. I had thought that Zelda was the lady that was there the whole time with the crew in my head. And then when it's not Zelda and it's this other lady the whole time, and Zelda comes in, kind of towards I was like, oh shit. Like, how did I forget this other person?
Right.
But
Which is interesting because I'll say on this last rewatch, the actor that most stood out to me as someone who like, I really like what they did here was actually Beatrice Straight, who played
mhm,
that the Dr. Lesh,
mhm,
the head
Mhm.
researcher. I get kind of like you, Brad. I was like, oh yeah, there were some your brain sort of jumps from like the major scenes, right? So
yeah,
you kind of think about like, okay, we got to get to Zelda, we got to get that. That part in the middle, I think she carried that, right? Like,
yeah,
she did
agreed.
such a good job, and she was so much warmer than I remember her being, and so much more like invested in what was happening with the family than I remember her being. So that was delightful, just to have that experience.
She gave us
Mhm.
Zelda, so how bad could
Yeah.
she be? Right? Actually, the name in the movie is Tangina, I guess.
Tin, tin, yeah,
Tangina. I don't know.
Tangina,
Tangina.
Tangina.
Yeah.
Well, 40 years of
Ooh.
Poltergeist. I think there's a whole lot more conversation we could have. I remember us being like, are we going to have enough to talk about for 40 minutes with Poltergeist? But yes, easily we did so. And we didn't even talk about some of the ways that this film has influenced a lot of horror movies to come. So I want to leave on that note, rapid fire. Real quick, what are some other movies that you think maybe cribbed notes from this film?
The what is it? The oh god, not Insidious, but what's the series with
The Conjuring.
Conjuring, yeah, The Conjuring. I think definitely, benefits from like the platform that a movie like Poltergeist created.
Yeah, and honestly, because of that, I think it's easy to, from a pop culture perspective, of course, Simpsons did it in Treehouse of Horror, but also when you see, you mentioned The Conjuring, but you kind of you briefly mentioned Insidious too. Insidious was a movie where the whole thing was about like the misdirect of that, spoiling Insidious very slightly, was that you think that it's a haunted house movie for the first part of it, because from a pop culture perspective, that's what we're trained to think. Between a couple of the other famous like haunted house movies, like Amityville Horror and this, that's what your thought goes to, that, not Haunted Child or Possessed Child or something like that. The other thing that it definitely influenced was the 2015 remake of Poltergeist, which is absolute trash. And if you're absolutely looking at something to watch, make sure you pick the right one.
It's funny. We had a conversation last night as we were looking up the movie to stream. We put, type in Poltergeist and you get all the Poltergeist sequels and remakes and all that. And then the 2015 remake comes up, and I'm like, did we see that? And I'm like, wait, and it was we played the trailer for it, and not only did we see it, but we reviewed it on this show.
Yep.
Oh yeah, we did.
Like Brad looked up the episode, and it's like it's a episode 131. If you folks want to go back and hear our 2015, and I remember
episodes ago.
I want to find out like what I thought of the movie back then, because now that I'm thinking back on it, I'm like, it doesn't stand up to the original at all, because first of all, you're going up against something so iconic. It's like if you like remade Star Wars, like it's not going to happen. It's not going to be good. But as I remember it, I didn't think it was like that god awful terrible. Now that I think back on it, but maybe I reviewed it badly. I just don't remember.
I was fortunate in that, like, since this one was, not only did I like star rated on Letterboxd, but actually decided to sometimes, like, 1 in like 10, I'll like do a full write up on, even if it's just like 4 or 5 paragraphs, 4 or 5 sentences, just on. This one happened to be one of them, so I did the same thing. Like, I remember not liking it, but is that just
how much
sort
did
of
I
like,
not like it?
how much did I not like it? And I'm like, oh, I really didn't like it.
Indeed. All right, well, Poltergeist is going back in the vault. I don't know that we'll be around in 40 more years to celebrate its 80th anniversary.
That hand's going to creep up out of the vault.
Yeah.
But great discussion, and thanks to everybody in the chat. We didn't get to every comment, but it was great hearing your thoughts as well. Ryan mentions a couple other movies that he thinks were influenced by Poltergeist, that being House and The Gate. I could definitely see that. For me, Paranormal Activity seemed to take a lot of notes from Poltergeist.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, House was like 3 or 4 years after. So you've got to imagine that Poltergeist hit, and then this one was probably just going into production. So there's no way that this was not in their mind, right?
Well, then we had the animated Monster House, which is, I think, like maybe leans a bit on this one.
Yeah. I think the DNA from this movie has seeded itself out there in many, many willing orifices and sprouted good things. So,
yes.
All right, let's do this. Let's move on to some plugs as we look to wrap up for this week. Plugs is that part of the show where we, your podcast hosts, like to put things that we love on your radar, thinking that you might love them too. So let's kick things over to Will. Will, what is your plug for this week?
Mine's sort of a twofold one, in that, like, it's sort of a setup for next week, with a little bit of an extra spin on it. I know we've got a couple of different streaming films that we've been talking about, and one of them that recently hit and that we may be talking about next week is this movie Prey, which is the new Predator film, which is on Hulu, went straight to streaming. So come back next week. It'll be fun. You can come check out the show. But I'm a big supporter of like indigenous representation in film, and this movie. I'll talk about like all of the reasons why, but I did want to take a moment and say, hey, go please watch this movie. Go watch this movie. This is an amazing movie. We'll talk about the reasons why I think it's amazing, but this is one of those movies that not only deserves to be seen, but it deserves to have as many people see it as possible, so that people will keep making films like this. And sometimes those initial like week 1, week 2 streaming numbers can be really important on that type of thing. So if you're looking for something to watch, watch the movie Prey. Not only do I recommend it, but you can find out a little bit more about like some of the cool things about it and why when we talk about it on next week's show. So do yourself a favor, get yourself prepped, watch this movie, and then come back and talk about it live with us in a week.
Rock on.
Talk with us.
That's right. Thanks, Will. Jim, what's your plug this week?
Oh, my plug is a drama series that we've been watching. It's been going on for a while now. I think it's in season 4, but we're only in we're just after season 1. It's called Yellowstone. And this is a series, I think it's right now on Hulu. I've really been digging this. I don't know why I didn't get turned on to this before. Maybe it was just like, oh, it's another cowboy show or whatever. But I'm sorry, Brad. It's not on Hulu. I guess it's on Peacock. But it's Yellowstone. It stars Kevin Costner, Luke Grimes, Wes Bentley is in this, and we saw Wes Bentley, if you guys remember, seeing American Beauty. He was the young teen in that.
He loves plastic bags, right?
He loves the guy who likes plastic bags. Yeah. And Gil Birmingham is in this. I talked about him, I think, on the show previously. I love Gil Birmingham. Most recently in Wind River, I really liked him in.
It was so good.
Yes, and Kelly Riley plays the daughter in this movie, Kevin Costner's daughter, and she's got one of those characters she can really sink her teeth into, and it's really great. We're a season in, and I think it's like 10 episodes, and it went by so fast. It's a pretty heavy drama. A lot goes on. Man, you talk about indigenous representation. This one kind of examines it from the other side and how problematic that things became in terms of like land ownership and land acquisition back in the West. And this movie, this series kind of touches on that a little bit. I hope it goes into it more, but it definitely keeps dropping that message as it goes in its main drama. Good stuff. I love it. It's called Yellowstone. It's on Peacock. I would say, if you like shows like Sopranos, Brad, you mentioned other shows that it was like Sopranos, Breaking Bad,
Game of Thrones,
and Game of Thrones. It's like
on a
rancher Game of Thrones. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Rancher, not Ranch or Game of Thrones.
Rancher.
That'd be an easy choice every time.
Ranch.
I'd always choose Ranch.
Yeah. Oh God, Ranch.
Yeah, Game of Thrones Doritos are the worst.
Nice. Well, thank you for your plug, babe. Mine is a show that started off on Fox, and then the show got removed from Fox. It went over after its 2 seasons on Fox. It had its 3rd season on Hulu, and it just recently wrapped its season 3 run. And that show is the brainchild of Seth MacFarlane, The Orville. some people, if you have a long memory, may remember me talking about how much I fucking hated The Orville during its first season when it originally came out. That was back when it was trying to be Family Guy in space. The show retooled itself about midway through season 2 and became much more of a serious sci-fi drama with comedic elements, as opposed to being a sci-fi comedy with drama elements. It just shifted that skew, and Seth MacFarlane started like tamping down some of his worst proclivities. But season 2 of the show, it really hits its stride, and season 3 has just been, I'll say, 95% amazing. There was about 5% that was just like, ugh, really? And Jim, you probably know what I'm talking about. But the reason that I'm bringing this up, the show right now has not yet been renewed. It's in the hands of Disney, who owns everything these days. And The Orville is coming to Disney Plus on August 10th. And the deal is, if people really watch and engage with the show on Disney Plus, Disney has told Seth MacFarlane they'd be willing to renew the show for a 4th season. But they're going to wait and see what the streaming numbers are like. So, if you like sci-fi, particularly if you like Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, this show is very much in the vein of those old 90s Star Trek shows. They're tackling a lot of really incredible social messages and things
Moral
that are going
issues,
on, moral issues. And you know, it really looks at them not through like one lens or two lenses, but like 20 lenses to help you kind of wrap your head around these things. It's kind of amazing for a sci-fi show to do that. But that said, season 1 of The Orville, if you're not a super Seth MacFarlane comedy guy like me, it's a little bit rough. If you do love his sense of humor, you'll probably really love season 1 and then hate it when it changes mid-season 2 to be more
Where'd the
serious.
comedy go?
And if the idea of like waiting till midway through season 2 if something sounds off to someone, I would have a more generous view of it, even that I think that it even retools itself after the pilot. Like episode 2 of the show goes straight into like one of those serious, like, how do we handle this complicated issue when we're dealing with different cultures and how they have different taboos? Like, you know, is that a taboo for us when it's theirs? How should we impose ourselves? As early as episode 2 of this series, right? It's the only Star Trek show I'm watching right now, to be honest. And you know, and I'm not a huge Trekkie, but I enjoyed Next Generation stuff, and this feels like that. This feels like that. This is not a parody of it. This is a love letter to the Next Generation. So yeah, it's hard recommend. I'm sort of like I'm still savoring the episodes, so like I'm only like 4 or 5 episodes into season 3 right now, just sort of like when I have a spare moment, like picking away at it, and I'm forcing myself not to binge. And so once it hits Disney Plus, I'm gonna pop over and kind of finish my watching over there.
There you go. That's a great idea. I've seen all 3 seasons. I'm probably just going to put them on in the background while I'm doing shit and just let them play just to like pump up the count numbers. There aren't many shows like, you know, that I would go to that length for to try and get it renewed. But, you know, if you'd asked me 2 years ago if I'd be fighting for a new season of The Orville, I'd punch you in the mouth and say,
"Oh my God, Brad.
You?" No, I'm just kidding.
So this is how
this is 2 years ago.
This is how much of a recommend that is from Brad. Right now, if you could only pick one of the following 2 shows to come back for another season, Picard or The Orville, which do you choose?
Oh, The Orville. Picard is fucking awful. It's terrible.
Can you imagine if we warped back in time a couple years and asked that same question, and you told yourself past version of you, like that's what your answer would be?
Yeah.
You're like, no.
You'd say no way. The anticipation for Picard, had been off the charts. We remember when just before it premiered, how people were so excited. And, at least for us, and granted, there were probably people out there who love Picard,
sure.
But at least for us, it just didn't hit very well. And, but I have kind of grown, And The Orville, on the other hand, is a show that initially, like Brad, I'm like, it's really not my jam. I'm not like a what is it, Family Guy. You know, I can maybe watch small doses and that's it. But what they've done with the show, I think, has been remarkable. And some of these episodes in season 3 are kind of like all timers. Will, so you're in for a treat. And so yeah, for me, it's same thing, hands down. The Orville, not Picard.
Maybe you know, I don't know. I know we tend to stick to movies here, but maybe there's a future where we have kind of an off week, and maybe we could do like a Orville episode or something like that. That'd be a lot of fun. Just
An Orville deep dive. Yeah.
Maybe when you finish the season, don't rush, savor them. But maybe when you're done and people have had a chance to watch a bunch of the show on Disney Plus, we could do an episode. I think that'd be
We only just finished it last night, so
yeah.
Well,
listen, I didn't mean to take over all the plug time with my plug. I'm sorry about that, guys.
No,
Orville show.
Yeah.
But glad that you guys like it as much as you do as well. So next week we are going to be reviewing definitely one, possibly two movies. For sure will be Prey, the movie that Will mentioned in his plug, set in the Predator universe. And then the other one that we're talking about is They/Them. Will, what service was that on?
That is on. Oh my god, I'm 99% sure it's Peacock, but now it just flew right out of my brain. So
okay, that's because I put you on the spot.
Yeah, and
Sorry
also it's one of those ones where like I was waiting to queue that one up, so I haven't watched it yet. Peacock, it is Peacock. And it is a slasher horror film set like an LGBTQ like conversion camp. Kevin Bacon stars in it.
Yeah. So check out Prey and They/Them, and we will be with you all again next week when we return. Assuming Jim and I make it back from the mountains, we weren't like mauled by bears or something. We'll be back at you next week.
Relative, bills do have eyes,
or crushed in a rock slide, whatever. Yeah.
Whatever. All right, listen, in case people want to talk to us before we die camping, Jim, or before you're on the show next week, Jim, where can people find you online?
I'm on Twitter at JJP Out West. Those are my initials, JJP, and then the words Out West. I'm also on Facebook under my name, Jim Pugliafico.
All right, excellent. Will, how about you?
Yeah, I'm all over social media. Twitter, Instagram, I'm at Whatever Cove. It's on the screen right now if you're watching live. I'm on Facebook, William Lindis. I'm on Letterboxd. You can search for William Lindis there. And I'm still on TikTok at The Movie Bear. So just find me on whichever platform you most enjoy using and say hi.
All right, excellent. And you can find me on Facebook. I'm the Brad Harris, who likely has Chub Chaser and Bear friends in common with you. Please send me a message before you add me, just so I know that you are indeed a real person. Or you can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at iBradPro. Folks, don't forget to like, subscribe on YouTube, give us a review on iTunes or Spotify, and be sure to follow us on social media. Just look for Movie Bears Podcast on Facebook or find us on Twitter at MB Podcast. We'll talk to you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.